I had planned to give Mason and Lauren a wedding gift, $120 million. Helen Whitfield's voice rang through the glittering ballroom, every guest frozen mid-breath. Mason stiffened, Lauren's eyes lit up waiting for their triumph. But Helen's next words dropped like a hammer. However, this morning I learned the truth, and the truth is worth more than any fortune. The room fell into stunned silence. Gas, whispers, and the flicker of phones recording filled the air. All eyes locked on Helen as she raised a folded note, her voice steady, cutting through the tension. Someone thought they could humiliate me today, but instead, they revealed exactly who they are. What came next would shatter the perfect wedding illusion, expose betrayal at its core, and change the Whitfield family forever. Would you dare walk away from everything to claim your dignity like Helen did? On the morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, Helen Whitfield awoke to a nightmare. The Portland sky outside her bedroom window was glowing pale blue, the city slowly waking up, but inside her room, she felt stripped bare. Her hand trembled as it slid across her scalp, smooth, cold, completely bald. Her silver gray hair, which she had cherished for 65 years, was gone. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe. She stumbled to the bathroom mirror, and what stared back at her was a stranger, a humiliated, broken woman on the very day her only son was getting married. On the nightstand lay a folded note that hadn't been there before. Helen picked it up with shaking hands, her chest tight with dread. The words hit like blades. "Now you finally look the way you should, you pathetic old hag. Enjoy the wedding." Signed in a flourish only Lauren Hayes, her future daughter-in-law, would dare. Helen's knees almost gave out. Today of all days. She sat on the bed, her head in her hands, tears spilling. This house had been her kingdom, every stone and brick earned through decades of sweat and sacrifice. And yet here she was, mocked in her own home by a woman who had never lifted a finger for anything in her life. Memories flooded in snide comments from Lauren about her clothes, her hair, her age, each one sharpened by Mason's silence, her son sitting beside his fiancée, as if chained, nodding, never once defending the mother who had raised him single-handedly since Peter's heart gave out when Mason was 12. But today was meant to be special. Helen had spent months preparing the ultimate gift, a $120 million transfer to Mason and Lauren's joint account, her way of ensuring her son's future security. Even her lawyer, Daniel Harper, had warned her, "Are you sure that's nearly everything?" She had smiled, confident that generosity might finally bridge the cold distance between them. Now, staring at her reflection, bald, mocked, she felt the first tremor of defiance stir inside her. This was exactly what Lauren wanted for her: to stay home, too humiliated to show her face, to disappear quietly. But Helen Whitfield had built Whitfield Property Group from nothing. She had clawed her way through grief, debt, and loneliness. She would not be erased on her son's wedding day. She picked up the phone and dialed. "Daniela, bring me the best wig you own, right now." Her voice was steel, masking the storm inside. As she waited, Helen drifted back to the past. The endless nights learning real estate law after Peter's death, the mornings she dragged herself to work while Mason slept soundly, the deals she closed by sheer willpower. She had forged an empire so her son would never know fear, never feel hunger. And yet he had grown entitled, demanding money as if it flowed from a faucet, never once asking how it was earned. Hours later, dressed in a midnight blue gown, her wig perfectly styled, Helen arrived at St. Clement Church. She looked every inch the proud mother of the groom, but beneath her composed smile, her heart pounded with dread. She wanted to believe it was nerves, but deep down she knew it was something darker. From the back of the church, she heard Mason's voice. She froze, hidden behind a column. His words sliced through the silence. "Just a little longer, Vanessa. Once Mom transfers the money today, we're free." Lauren doesn't suspect a thing. Helen's world tilted. Vanessa Reed, the young secretary. Her son was planning to throw away his marriage before it even began. Shaking, she pressed closer. Mason's tone was cold, calculated. "Mom will hand over the $120 million. After a few months, I'll send her to Maple Grove Assisted Living. She's 65, it's normal." The ground seemed to vanish beneath Helen's feet. The boy she had raised, the man she had sacrificed everything for, was plotting to discard her like trash. She staggered back, nearly gasping aloud, but she forced herself to stay silent. Her chest heaved as she steadied herself, trying to process the betrayal. But before she could retreat, another voice carried from the bridal suite down the hall. She crept closer, her stomach clenched. Inside, Lauren's laughter rang out sharp as glass. Mason is clueless. Once the transfer's done, I'll file for divorce. Half of that fortune will be mine. Her bridesmaids laughed with her, joking about Helen as if she were nothing more than a nuisance. Helen's vision blurred. Her son was using her. His bride was using him. And she, the woman who had given them everything, was about to lose it all. But as the horror settled, something inside her hardened. They thought she was powerless. They thought she would bow her head in shame. They had no idea who Helen Whitfield really was. She walked out of the hallway, her back straight, her eyes dry. Tonight she would let the wedding unfold, let them smile for the cameras, let them think they had won. But when she raised her glass for the toast, the truth would cut deeper than any blade. And for the first time in years, Helen felt not fear, but power. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. Do you think Helen should expose everything right there at the wedding, or stay silent and take her revenge later? If you were in her place, would you cancel the money transfer immediately or wait until the perfect moment? And tell me, do you believe Mason truly loves his mother deep down, or has greed already destroyed that bond forever? The ceremony at St. Clement Church unfolded like a perfectly staged performance. The white roses glistened, the organ swelled, and Mason Whitfield stood at the altar smiling as if nothing in the world could touch him. Lauren Hayes, radiant in a lace gown, floated down the aisle, every inch the vision of a devoted bride. To the guests, it was the picture of love and promise. But to Helen Whitfield, seated in the front pew, it was nothing but a carefully crafted illusion. Her son's whispered betrayal still rang in her ears. Once Mom transfers the money, we're free. And Lauren's smug voice from the bridal suite echoed like poison, half that fortune will be mine. They had conspired together, weaving a net of lies around her, expecting her to walk blindly into it. What they didn't know was that Helen had already snapped the threads. She had canceled the $120 million transfer that morning. Daniel Harper, her lawyer, had confirmed it with steady, measured words. The money is safe, Helen. No one can touch it now unless you sign again. A small victory, but one she clung to as the vows echoed through the vaulted ceilings. The priest's voice carried, "Do you, Mason Whitfield, take Lauren Hayes as your lawfully wedded wife?" Mason answered firmly, "I do." Helen's chest tightened. That voice, the same voice that once told her as a boy that he'd never leave her side. Now it belonged to a man willing to sell his soul for fortune. Lauren's "I do" was almost gleeful, her eyes darting toward the crowd as if savoring the future applause, the power, the wealth. The priest raised his hand. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The congregation erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. The bride and groom kissed as though it were destiny. Helen clapped softly, her face a mask of pride, but inside her heart was beating with cold determination. At the reception in the Grand Alder Ballroom, the scene sparkled with chandeliers, champagne, and laughter. Helen moved through the guests with grace, every smile rehearsed, every word measured. She was the perfect hostess, complimenting Lauren's gown, admiring the floral arrangements, even laughing when an old friend joked about Mason's nervous grin at the altar. But every step, every laugh was calculated. She was gathering strength for the moment she would strike. When Mason asked her to dance, Helen accepted. The orchestra played softly and he leaned close. "Mom," he said, his voice honeyed, "I can't tell you how much it means to me that you're here. I know things have been tense, but I love you." Her eyes locked on his. Those same eyes had once been innocent, trusting. Now they were filled with a charm so rehearsed it made her stomach turn. She forced a smile. "And I love you, Mason, more than you can imagine." He smiled, believing he had her where he wanted her. He had no idea his performance was about to unravel. Finally, the moment came. A waiter placed a flute of champagne in her hand. Mason, with his arm around Lauren, raised his own glass and turned to her. "Mom, would you like to say a few words?" The ballroom fell silent. All eyes turned toward Helen. She rose slowly, letting the pause stretch her gaze, sweeping the room. She felt the weight of hundreds of expectant stares, saw Lauren's polished smile and Mason's confident expression. They thought this was the moment of their triumph, the announcement of their fortune. Thank you all for being here tonight, Helen began, her voice steady, clear. As Mason's mother, I cannot express how proud I am to see my son marry the woman he loves. The guests erupted in applause. Mason squeezed her hand. Lauren beamed. Helen let the cheers fade before continuing. For 33 years, I've lived for Mason's happiness. I built a company from nothing. I sacrificed. I endured because I wanted him to have a life without fear, without struggle. Her words trembled with authenticity, pulling her audience in. Heads nodded, people leaned forward. And today, she went on, I had planned to give Mason and Lauren a wedding gift, $120 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mason stiffened. Lauren's eyes lit up. But Helen raised her hand, silencing the growing chatter. However, she said, her tone sharpening like a blade, this morning, I learned the truth. And the truth is worth more than any fortune. The room fell dead silent. Mason's face drained of color. Lauren's smile faltered. Helen reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This note was left on my nightstand. Now you look the way you should, you pathetic old hag. Enjoy the wedding. A wave of shock rolled across the ballroom. Guests turned to Lauren, who sat frozen, her knuckles white against her glass. But that's not all, Helen continued, her voice cutting through the silence. I overheard Mason this morning speaking with Vanessa Reed, his secretary. He promised her that once he had my money, they would be together. Gasp murmurs a cry from someone in the back. Mason stumbled to his feet, his face flushed with panic. Mom, stop. Oh, I'm not finished. Helen snapped, her voice like steel. She turned to Lauren. And as for you, Lauren, tell your bridesmaids what you bragged about today, how you plan to divorce Mason after this night and claim half of my fortune. Lauren's face went crimson, her mouth opening, closing, but no words came out. The crowd erupted in whispers, phones lifted discreetly to record. The fairy tale wedding had cracked open, revealing the rot inside. Helen stood tall, her voice unwavering. You wanted to humiliate me. Instead, you've unmasked yourselves. You will get nothing. Not my money, not my home, not my respect. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mason slumped into his chair, defeated. Lauren stared at her glass as if it might swallow her whole. And Helen, for the first time in years, felt free. Helen Whitfield walked out of the altar ballroom that night with her head held high. Behind her chaos erupted shouts, accusations, and the shattering of glasses echoed through the grand hall. Guests were whispering, recording, posting. But Helen didn't look back. For the first time in years, she wasn't weighed down by guilt or fear. She had faced her betrayers head on, and she had taken back her power. The cool night air of Portland wrapped around her as she stepped into her car, her chest rising with something she hadn't felt in decades: freedom. The next morning, Daniel Harper came to her home in the quiet Alameda neighborhood just as she had asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Helen, the entire city is talking about last night. Videos of your speech are everywhere. Are you sure you want to go through with the changes you mentioned? Helen poured him a cup of coffee and smiled, calm for the first time in years. More sure than I've ever been, Daniel. The money, the empire I built, all of it for Mason. But last night I realized giving him everything would only destroy him further. I have to let him face life on his own terms without using me as his safety net. Daniel nodded and opened his briefcase. Helen signed the papers that morning, rewriting her will. Every cent of her fortune would now go to 3 charitable foundations, supporting widows, single mothers, and women starting their own businesses. Mason would inherit nothing. If he wants a future, Helen said softly, he'll have to build it himself. In the weeks that followed, Mason's world collapsed. His marriage to Lauren dissolved within months when it became clear there was no fortune to claim. Lauren packed her designer dresses and moved back with her parents, humiliated by the public scandal. Mason tried clinging to Vanessa Reed, but she disappeared once she realized the money was gone. By summer, Mason was living in a small rented apartment in Beaverton, stripped of the luxuries he once took for granted. Helen, meanwhile, discovered a new kind of life. She no longer answered frantic late-night calls from her son asking for money. She no longer had to tiptoe around Lauren's cold stares in her own home. Instead, she woke up each morning to sunlight streaming into her quiet house, brewed her coffee, and opened the window to let in the Oregon breeze. Her bald head, once a source of humiliation, became a symbol of renewal. And when her hair finally grew back white strong, unashamed, she wore it with pride. She signed up for painting classes at a small studio in downtown Portland. At first, her hands shook, holding the brush unused to creating instead of calculating. But soon the colors began to flow, landscapes of the Oregon coast, portraits of women she met in support groups. The paintings carried her grief, her resilience, her rebirth. Her instructor, a lively woman named Margaret, often told her, "Helen, you're not just painting pictures, you're painting your life back together." Travel, too, became a part of her healing. For decades, she had told herself travel was impractical, too expensive, too self-indulgent. Now she went anyway. She strolled through the vineyards of Willamette Valley, walked along the shores of Cannon Beach, even ventured overseas to see Paris in the spring. It was in Italy, standing in a quiet vineyard in Tuscany, that she met Arthur Romano, a widower with kind eyes and a gentle laugh. Their bond wasn't sudden passion, but something steadier, two souls who had carried burdens and were finally learning to lay them down. "You know," Arthur said one evening as they walked among rows of vines, "when you've spent a lifetime giving to others, it takes courage to finally give to yourself." Helen squeezed his hand and smiled. "I think I'm finally learning how." Back in Portland, word of Helen's speech at the wedding continued to spread. Strangers stopped her at grocery stores or cafes, telling her they admired her courage. Some even shared their own stories of betrayal, of setting boundaries, of reclaiming their lives. Helen realized she hadn't just freed herself that night, she had inspired others to do the same. 2 years later, Helen made one final decision. She sold the grand family house that had once been filled with both love and sorrow. It was too big, too heavy with memories. In its place, she bought a cozy seaside home in Cannon Beach with a garden full of wildflowers and a studio with floor-to-ceiling windows. The house smelled of salt and pine, and each morning she sat on her porch with her easel painting as the waves crashed beyond. Mason came to see her one last time before she moved. He looked older, thinner, his eyes haunted by regret. "Mom," he said quietly at the door, "is it really true you're selling the house?" "The one I grew up in." Helen studied him for a long moment. For the first time in years, his words weren't laced with entitlement. They carried only loss. "Yes, Mason, it's time for me to move on." "And us," his voice cracked. "Is there no way to fix this?" A pang of old maternal instinct tugged at her, but she steadied herself. "Mason, I gave you everything I had for 33 years. You chose a path that broke something between us. I can't fix that for you. You'll have to learn to fix it yourself." His eyes filled with tears, but Helen didn't falter. She hugged him briefly, then let go. As he walked away, she knew it was the hardest thing she had ever done, but also the right thing. Now, years later, Helen lives the life she once thought impossible. Her paintings hang in small galleries across Oregon. Her mornings are filled with salt air and the hum of gulls. Arthur visits often, and together they travel, laugh, and dream, not of what they lost, but of what they still have left. When Helen looks in the mirror, she no longer sees a broken woman stripped of her dignity. She sees a survivor, an artist, a woman reborn. Her silver hair glows in the sunlight, and her reflection smiles back with peace. The past is a closed book. The future is hers. And most of all, Helen knows this: true love, whether for a child, a partner, or oneself, is not blind sacrifice. It is the strength to set boundaries, the courage to demand respect, and the wisdom to finally proudly belong to yourself. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. Do you think Helen's choice to leave her fortune to charity was the right decision? If you were in her shoes, would you forgive Mason or let him face the consequences on his own? What lesson do you think this story gives about love, sacrifice, and self-respect? If you enjoyed it, comment the number 100 below. Tell me which country you're watching from, and don't forget to share this story with others who need to hear it.